My name is Dorothea Marlowe, and I'm 68 years old. I've survived a lot in my life. The death of my husband when my son was only 7. Raising a child alone while working 2 jobs. Breast cancer that I fought and beat at 53. But nothing. Absolutely nothing. Prepared me for the humiliation I would endure on what should have been one of the happiest days of my life. My son Damien's wedding day. I woke up that Saturday morning in my modest apartment in Portland with a flutter of excitement in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. My only child was getting married. Damien, now 37, successful and established, was finally settling down with his fiancée, Vivian Ashford. I'd never warmed to Vivian. There was something cold in her eyes, something calculating in the way she smiled, but Damien seemed happy. And after years of watching him throw himself into his career as a tech executive, I was just grateful he'd found someone. I told myself I was being an overprotective mother, that my instincts were wrong, that I should be happy for him. The wedding was being held at the Cascade Grand Hotel in Seattle, an opulent venue that probably cost more than I'd earned in the last 5 years combined. Damien and Vivian had spared no expense. Crystal chandeliers, imported flowers, a guest list of 300 people, most of whom I didn't know. I'd driven up from Portland the night before, staying at a budget motel near the airport because the hotel where the wedding was being held was far too expensive. I'd spent what I could afford on a new dress, a simple but elegant navy blue that I thought made me look presentable. I'd had my hair done at a local salon, splurging on a style that made me feel, for once, like I belonged in my son's new world. The ceremony was beautiful. I sat in the 3rd row, not the first, as the mother of the groom traditionally would, because Vivian's family needed more space, or so I'd been told. I watched my son stand at the altar in his expensive tuxedo, his face glowing with happiness, and I felt my heart swell with love and pride. This was the boy I'd raised, the child I'd sacrificed everything for. I'd worked as a waitress during the day and cleaned offices at night to keep him in good schools. I'd gone without so he could have what he needed. I'd supported his dreams, celebrated his successes, been there for every milestone even when it cost me. I remembered him at 7, crying in my arms after his father's funeral, asking me if Daddy was ever coming back. I remembered him at 15, winning his first coding competition, running to hug me first before anyone else. I remembered him at 22, graduating from Stanford with honors, thanking me in his speech for never giving up on him. That boy had loved me. That boy had appreciated everything I'd done. But somewhere along the way, as he'd climbed higher in the tech world, as he'd made more money and moved in wealthier circles, something had changed. His calls became less frequent. His visits stopped altogether. He seemed embarrassed by my modest lifestyle, by my simple apartment, by the fact that I still worked part-time at a bookstore because my retirement savings were minimal. Vivian had made it worse. Since they'd started dating 2 years ago, Damien had become even more distant. She came from old money, the kind of family that summered in the Hamptons and wintered in Aspen. To her, I was an embarrassment. The working-class mother who didn't fit into their world. But this was his wedding day. Surely, on this day, I would be treated with the respect and love a mother deserved. The ceremony ended, and everyone moved to the grand ballroom for the reception. That's when things started to go wrong. I looked for my name at the seating chart display in the lobby. I expected to be at a family table, close to the head table where Damien and Vivian would sit. Instead, I found my name at table 28, located in the far back corner of the ballroom, partially hidden behind a decorative column. I told myself it was a mistake, but when I made my way to the table, I found it filled with people I didn't know. Distant acquaintances of Vivian's family, people who barely glanced at me when I introduced myself as the groom's mother. From my seat, I could barely see the head table. I watched as Damien and Vivian made their entrance, as speeches were given by Vivian's father and the best man, as the first dance happened. No one asked me to give a speech. No one acknowledged my presence. Then came dinner service. The waiters moved through the ballroom with practiced efficiency, serving each table in turn. They started with the head table, then moved to the family tables at the front. I watched as beautifully plated filet mignon and salmon dishes were delivered, as wine glasses were filled, as people laughed and enjoyed their meals. Table by table, the service continued. But table 28 was skipped, again and again. I watched other tables that had been seated after us receive their food. I saw the waiters deliberately avoid our corner of the room. "Excuse me," I finally said to a passing waiter. "When will our table be served?" He looked uncomfortable. "I'll check on that for you, ma'am." Another 20 minutes passed. By now, most of the ballroom had been served and had finished their meals. The dinner plates were being cleared from the front tables. Still, nothing came to our corner. Finally, a waiter approached our table with a cart, but instead of the elegant plated meals everyone else had received, he brought out serving dishes of what was clearly leftover food. The filet mignon pieces were small and overcooked. The salmon was dry. The vegetables were cold. It looked like the scraps from the kitchen, the food that hadn't been good enough to serve to the important guests. "What is this?" asked the man sitting next to me, a business associate of Vivian's uncle. "This is what's available," the waiter said, looking deeply uncomfortable. He was following orders, I realized. Someone had told him to serve us this way. I couldn't eat. I sat there, staring at the cold, congealed food on my plate, feeling humiliation burn through me like acid. Around me, the other guests at the table were too polite or too uncomfortable to complain, but I could see their expressions. They knew this was wrong. They knew we were being treated as less than. Then Damien approached our table. I felt a surge of hope. My son would fix this. He would realize there had been a terrible mistake. He stood beside me, his face flushed from champagne and happiness. Vivian stood next to him, her hand on his arm, a strange smile on her perfectly painted lips. "Mom," Damien said, his voice loud enough that nearby tables could hear. "I see you got your dinner. I hope it's to your liking." "Damien, this is," I started to say. "She's used to eating what life leaves behind," he said, laughing. He actually laughed as he said it, looking at Vivian for approval. "Right, Mom? You've always been so good at making do with leftovers." The nearby tables fell silent. I heard someone gasp, but Vivian laughed, a tinkling, cruel sound, and soon others were laughing too, uncertain whether this was some kind of joke they were supposed to find funny. I looked up at my son, at the man I'd raised, the child I'd sacrificed everything for, and I saw a stranger, someone who looked like Damien, but who had lost every shred of decency, every trace of the compassion I'd tried so hard to instill in him. "Damien," I whispered, my voice shaking. "How could you?" "Oh, come on, Mom. Don't be so sensitive. We're just having fun." He put his arm around Vivian's waist. "My wife thinks you're taking up too much space in my life anyway. It's time I prioritized my real family. Your real family." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood up slowly, my legs trembling. Everyone was watching now, the entire back section of the ballroom, sensing drama. I looked at my son one more time, memorizing his face, because I knew in that moment that I would never see him the same way again. "Excuse me," I said quietly. "I need some air." I walked out of that ballroom with my head held high, even though tears were streaming down my face. I walked through the hotel lobby, past the expensive flower arrangements and the gilded mirrors, out into the cool Seattle evening. No one followed me. No one noticed I was gone. Or if they did, they didn't care enough to check if I was all right. I stood on the sidewalk outside the hotel, cars passing by, strangers hurrying past, and I let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. My son had publicly humiliated me. He'd served me garbage and laughed about it. He'd declared that I wasn't his real family, that I was taking up too much space in his life, after everything I'd given him, after every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every penny I'd scraped together to give him opportunities, after raising him alone, loving him unconditionally, being there for him always. This was how he repaid me. I took out my phone and called a taxi. I couldn't drive back to Portland tonight. I was too upset, too shaken, but I also couldn't stay here, couldn't risk running into anyone from the wedding. As I waited for the taxi, I made a decision. This wasn't going to end with me as the victim, the humiliated mother who'd been treated like trash and accepted it. Damien wanted me out of his life. He wanted to declare that I wasn't his real family. Fine. I would grant him that wish. But first, I would make sure he understood exactly what he was throwing away. Now, Chapter 2. The email that changed everything I spent that night in my budget motel near the airport, lying awake and staring at the water-stained ceiling. The events of the evening played on repeat in my mind. Damien's laugh, Vivian's cruel smile, the cold, congealed food on my plate, the words that had cut deeper than any knife. She's used to eating what life leaves behind. At some point during those dark hours, anger replaced grief. Not the hot, explosive anger that burns out quickly, but the cold, determined kind that clarifies everything. I'd spent 30 years being the understanding mother, the one who made excuses for Damien's behavior, who convinced myself that his growing distance was just him being busy, that his embarrassment over my modest means was just him adjusting to his new life. I'd accepted crumbs of affection and told myself it was enough. But it wasn't enough. It had never been enough. And after what happened at that wedding, I owed it to myself to stop pretending. At 6 a.m, as the weak Seattle dawn filtered through the thin motel curtains, I sat up and opened my laptop. My hands were steady as I began to type. Not an angry rant, not an emotional plea for understanding. Something more powerful than that. The truth. Subject. What you should know about the woman you humiliated. Dear Damien and Vivian, by now you're probably on your honeymoon, celebrating the beginning of your life together. I hope the weather is beautiful wherever you are. I hope you're happy. I'm writing this from a motel room near the Seattle airport because I couldn't bear to drive home last night after what happened at your wedding. I needed time to process what occurred, to understand how we arrived at this moment. Damien, do you remember when you were 7 years old and your father died? You asked me if Daddy was coming back, and I had to tell you no. You cried for hours, and I held you and promised you that even though Daddy was gone, you would always be safe, always be loved, always have everything you needed. I kept that promise. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to keep you in good schools. I went without meals so you could have new shoes for basketball tryouts. I drove a car held together with duct tape and prayer while saving money for your college fund. When you got into Stanford, one of the happiest moments of my life, I took out loans I'll still be paying off when I'm 80 to help cover what your scholarships didn't. I never asked you for gratitude. Love isn't supposed to be transactional. Parents sacrifice for their children because that's what love means. But I also didn't expect to be treated as less than human, to be served garbage at your wedding while you laughed about it in front of hundreds of people. She's used to eating what life leaves behind. Those were your words, Damien. And you're right. In a way, I did spend my life accepting what was left behind. But not because I was used to it. Because I chose to give you the best parts, the opportunities and resources that should have been mine, so you could have a better life than I did. I ate the leftovers so you could have the feast. I wore old clothes so you could have new ones. I lived in small apartments so you could go to private schools. And I did it gladly, because you were my son, and I loved you more than life itself. But love, I've realized, has to go both ways. And somewhere along your path to success, you stopped loving me back. Maybe it was gradual. Maybe it happened all at once. But the boy who used to hug me and thank me for everything became a man who seats his mother in the back corner and serves her scraps while joking about how she's used to eating garbage. Vivian, I don't know you well, so I won't presume to understand your motivations. But I know that a woman who encourages her new husband to publicly humiliate his mother is not a woman of character. I know that true class has nothing to do with money or social standing, and everything to do with how you treat people who can't benefit you. You both wanted me out of your lives. You made that abundantly clear last night. So I'm granting your wish. I'm removing myself from the equation. You won't get any more phone calls from me checking in. You won't get any more birthday cards or holiday gifts. You won't get the trust fund I'd been slowly building for your future children, the grandchildren I dreamed of knowing. Everything I saved for you goes to charity. Everything I plan to leave you in my will goes to organizations that help single mothers struggling to raise their children alone. Because those women understand what sacrifice means. They understand that being a parent means putting your child first, not throwing them away when they become inconvenient. I don't hate you, Damien. I'm not even angry anymore. I'm just sad. Sad for the relationship we'll never have. Sad for the man you've become. Sad that you'll never know the grandmother your children could have had, because I would have loved them the way I loved you, unconditionally and completely. But mostly, I'm sad for you, because you've lost something precious, and you don't even realize it. You've lost the one person in your life who loved you when you had nothing, who would have walked through fire for you, who saw you as more valuable than gold even when you treated her like garbage. I hope your marriage brings you everything you're looking for. I hope Vivian's family connections and social standing fill whatever emptiness drove you to treat your mother this way. I hope that when you're old and looking back on your life, You don't feel regret for this moment. But if you do, know this: I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I deserve to let go of the pain you've caused me and move forward with whatever years I have left. I deserve to stop waiting for crumbs of affection from someone who sees me as an embarrassment. This is goodbye, Damien. Not the angry, dramatic kind. Just a quiet closing of a door that should have been closed a long time ago. I wish you well. I hope you find happiness, but I won't be there to see it. Your mother, Dorothea. I read the email 3 times before sending it. Each time, I felt more certain that this was the right thing to do. Not cruel, not vindictive, just honest. A clear statement of boundaries and consequences. I hit send at 6:47 a.m. Seattle time, which meant it was 9:47 a.m. in Bermuda, where I knew from the wedding program they were honeymooning. Then I closed my laptop, packed my few belongings, and checked out of the motel. I drove back to Portland in silence, not listening to music or podcasts, just thinking about what came next. What came next, I realized, was living for myself. For the first time in 37 years, I didn't have a child to worry about, to sacrifice for, to structure my life around. I was free. It was a terrifying, exhilarating feeling. Chapter 3. The Aftermath of Truth. The first 3 days after sending the email, I heard nothing. Part of me had expected an immediate response, angry or apologetic or something, but there was only silence. I spent those days in a strange state of numbness, going through the motions of my life. I worked my shifts at the bookstore, came home to my apartment, made simple dinners for one, but everything felt different, lighter somehow, as if I'd put down a weight I'd been carrying for so long I'd forgotten it was there. On the 4th day, my phone rang. Damien's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for a long moment, my heart racing, then let it go to voicemail. 20 minutes later, I listened to the message. Mom. His voice was tight, controlled. I got your email. I think you're being extremely dramatic about what happened at the wedding. It was a joke. You're making it into this huge thing when it was just... Look, Vivian is very upset. You basically accused her of being a bad person in an email, and now she's crying, and our honeymoon is ruined. I think you owe us both an apology. Call me back. I deleted the message. An hour later, another call. This voicemail was different. Mom, seriously, what is wrong with you? Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Vivian showed the email to her mother, and now her whole family thinks I come from some trashy background with a vindictive mother who can't take a joke. You're making me look bad. You're ruining my marriage before it even starts. Can you please just apologize so we can all move on? I deleted that message too. Over the next week, the calls continued. Sometimes from Damien, sometimes from numbers I didn't recognize. Probably Vivian calling from her phone or using hotel phones. I didn't answer any of them. I'd said everything I needed to say in that email. There was nothing left to discuss. Then, 2 weeks after the wedding, I received a certified letter. It was from a law firm in Seattle. Expensive letterhead, the kind that charged $500 an hour. Dear Ms. Marlowe, we represent Damien Marlowe and Vivian Ashford Marlowe in the matter of defamation regarding communications sent by you on June 7th. Our clients contend that your email contained false and defamatory statements that have caused them significant emotional distress and damage to their reputations. Specifically, you accused Mrs. Ashford Marlowe of being a person without character and implied that she encouraged mistreatment of you. These statements are demonstrably false and have caused substantial harm to our clients' marriage and family relationships. We demand that you immediately send written apologies to both Mr. and Mrs. Marlowe. Retract all statements made in your June 7th email and cease any further communications that might damage our clients' reputations. Failure to comply within 10 business days will result in legal action for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and any other applicable causes of action. I read the letter sitting at my small kitchen table, and then I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I laughed. A real, genuine laugh that came from somewhere deep in my chest. They were threatening to sue me for telling the truth about what had happened at the wedding, for standing up for myself, for refusing to be treated as less than human. I called the only lawyer I knew, a woman named Patricia Reeves who'd helped me with my will years ago. She practiced family law, not defamation, but I trusted her judgment. "Dorothea," she said after I'd explained the situation, "this is what we call a SLAP suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. It's designed to intimidate you into silence, not because they have a real case. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation. If everything you said in that email was true, and it sounds like it was, they have no case. So what do? You do nothing. You don't respond to their demands. You don't apologize. You don't engage. If they actually file a lawsuit, which I doubt they will because no lawyer worth their salt would take this to trial, then we'll deal with it. But this is just intimidation, Dorothea. They're trying to bully you back into being the compliant mother who accepts mistreatment. I'm done being that mother," I said quietly. "Good. Then let them waste their money on threatening letters. You've done nothing wrong." I followed Patricia's advice. I didn't respond to the letter. I didn't call Damien. I didn't apologize or retract anything. And slowly, the silence from Seattle became permanent. But the rest of my life began to change in unexpected ways. Chapter 4. Finding myself in the ruins. 3 months after the wedding, I made a decision that surprised even me. I quit my job at the bookstore. It wasn't a dramatic gesture or a reaction to what had happened with Damien. It was simply that I'd realized something important. I'd spent the last 30 years living a half-life, working jobs I didn't love to support someone who no longer valued me. Now, at 68, I finally had the freedom to ask myself what I actually wanted. The answer came to me one afternoon while I was shelving books in the literature section. I picked up a copy of a novel set in Scotland, and suddenly I was crying, right there in the aisle, because I remembered something I'd forgotten for decades. I'd always wanted to travel. Before Damien was born, before I'd met his father even, I dreamed of seeing the world. Scotland, Ireland, Italy, Greece, all the places I'd read about in books, all the cultures and landscapes and histories I'd wanted to experience firsthand. But then life happened. Marriage, pregnancy, widowhood, single motherhood. The dreams got shelved along with the books I sold to other people. I told myself I'd travel someday, when Damien was grown, when I had money saved, when the time was right. The time was never right. There was always something more pressing, some expense for Damien's education, or some emergency that ate up my savings. And eventually, I'd stopped thinking about those dreams altogether, accepting that they belonged to a younger woman, a woman with different circumstances and different priorities. But now, standing in that bookstore with tears streaming down my face, I realized something. That woman was still inside me. Those dreams were still there. And if I didn't pursue them now, I never would. I had some money saved. Not much, but enough. The trust fund I'd been building for Damien's future children, before I'd redirected it to charity. About $40,000, built up slowly over years of careful budgeting. I could take that money and finally, see the world I'd only read about. I gave my 2 weeks notice at the bookstore. My manager was surprised but understanding. "You've been here for 15 years, Dorothea," she said. "You deserve to live a little. Go have an adventure." I started planning. I'd never been good at being spontaneous, at doing things just for myself, but I forced myself to learn. I bought a guidebook for Scotland and Ireland. I researched small hotels and bed and breakfasts. I watched YouTube videos about solo travel for older women. I was terrified. I'd never traveled internationally alone. I'd barely traveled at all. But the fear was accompanied by something else I hadn't felt in years. Excitement, anticipation, the sense that something wonderful was waiting for me if I was brave enough to reach for it. My neighbor, a widow named Helen who'd become a friend over the years, was thrilled when I told her my plans. "Good for you," she said firmly. "You've spent your whole life taking care of everyone else. It's about time you took care of yourself. What if something goes wrong?" I asked her one evening over tea. "What if I get sick, or lost, or robbed?" "Then you deal with it," Helen said simply. "A life doesn't stop being risky just because you're 68. And honestly, Dorothea, what's the worst that could happen? You die while seeing the Scottish Highlands. That sounds better than dying in this apartment having never seen them at all." She was right. I'd spent so long being careful, being responsible, being the person everyone could count on. And where had it gotten me? Alone, unappreciated, watching my life slip by from the sidelines. I booked a flight to Edinburgh, leaving in 6 weeks, 3 weeks in Scotland, 2 in Ireland. It would use up most of my savings, but that money had been meant for creating meaning and joy anyway. Why shouldn't some of that meaning and joy be mine? As my departure date approached, I found myself changing in small but significant ways. I started dressing differently, buying clothes that I actually liked instead of whatever was practical and cheap. I got my hair cut in a new style, shorter and more modern. I started going to a yoga class at the community center, rebuilding strength and flexibility I'd let deteriorate. I was becoming someone new, or maybe I was becoming who I'd always been underneath, the woman I'd buried beneath decades of sacrifice and self-denial. During this time, I thought about Damien often, but differently than before. Instead of the aching grief and sense of loss, I felt a strange detachment. He'd made his choice. He'd decided that his new life, his new wife, and his new social circle were more important than the mother who'd raised him. That was his right, painful as it was, but it was also my right to move forward without him, to build a life that didn't revolve around waiting for scraps of his attention, to find meaning and joy in places he'd never touched. The night before my flight, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to the familiar sounds of my apartment building, the pipes creaking, the neighbors, muffled television, the distant sound of traffic. Tomorrow, I'd leave all of this behind. Tomorrow, I'd step into the unknown. I was ready. Chapter 5. The Journey of Self-Discovery. Scotland in October was cold and rainy and absolutely magnificent. I arrived in Edinburgh exhausted from the overnight flight, disoriented by the time change, and immediately fell in love. The city rose around me in layers of stone and history, castles perched on volcanic rock, narrow medieval streets winding through the old town, elegant Georgian architecture in the new town. Everything I'd imagined, everything I'd read about in books, was suddenly real and tangible and mine to explore. I stayed in a small bed and breakfast in Stockbridge, a neighborhood north of the city center. The proprietor was a woman named Margaret, probably in her 70s, who took one look at my nervous excitement and seemed to understand immediately. "First time in Scotland?" she asked as she showed me to my room. "First time anywhere, really," I admitted. "Well, anywhere outside the United States. At 68, you're starting your adventures?" She smiled warmly. "Good for you, dear. Better late than never. And you've picked a wonderful place to start." That first week in Edinburgh, I walked everywhere. My feet ached. My knees protested. But I didn't care. I climbed the Royal Mile to Edinburgh Castle, stood on the ramparts and looked out over the city spread below. I visited the Scottish National Gallery and stood in front of paintings I'd only seen in books. I walked through Holyrood Park and climbed Arthur's Seat, a vigorous hike that left me breathless but rewarded me with panoramic views of the entire region. I ate meals alone in small cafes and pubs, something that had terrified me at first. I'd always been self-conscious about dining alone, worried people would think I was lonely or pathetic, but I discovered that nobody cared. I was just another traveler, another person moving through the world, and there was a freedom in that anonymity. One evening, in a traditional pub in the Grassmarket, an older couple at the next table struck up a conversation. They were from Australia, in their early 70s, traveling through Europe for 6 months. "It's our second grand tour," the woman, whose name was Claire, told me. "We did one in our 30s, before kids, and promised ourselves we'd do another when we retired. Now, here we are." "Do you have children?" I asked. 3, all grown, all settled. They thought we were crazy taking off for 6 months at our age. But you know what? It's been the best decision we ever made. She reached over and squeezed her husband's hand. "Life is short. You have to grab the good parts while you can." I thought about Damien, about how I'd put off my dreams for his sake, only to have him throw me away like garbage when I was no longer useful. Part of me felt bitter about the wasted years, but another part, the part that was growing stronger every day, felt grateful for this moment. I was here now. I was finally living. After Edinburgh, I rented a car, a terrifying prospect, given that I'd never driven on the left side of the road before. But I was determined to see the Highlands, the landscapes I'd dreamed about for decades. Driving through the Scottish Highlands was like moving through a painting. Mountains rose on either side of narrow roads, their peaks often shrouded in mist. Lochs appeared around curves. their waters reflecting the moody sky. Stone cottages dotted the landscape, smoke rising from their chimneys. Sheep grazed on impossible hillsides. I stayed in small villages with names I could barely pronounce. I hiked through glens and along coastal paths. I visited ancient castles and standing stones. I ate haggis and black pudding and decided I actually liked them. I learned to understand the local accent, to navigate roundabouts without panicking, to ask for directions when I was lost. And everywhere I went, I met other travelers. Most of them were younger than me, backpackers and gap-year students and young couples on adventures. But there were others like me too, older people who'd decided it was never too late to see the world, to have experiences, to push beyond their comfortable routines. One afternoon, hiking along a trail near Glen Coe, I met a woman named Susan from California. She was 72, hiking alone, and had the kind of weathered, joyful face that spoke of a life well lived. "My husband died 5 years ago," she told me as we walked together for a while. "We'd always planned to travel, but he got sick before we could. After he passed, I was so angry at him for dying, angry at myself for waiting, angry at life for being so unfair." "I understand that," I said quietly. Then one day I realized I had a choice. I could spend the rest of my life being angry, or I could do all the things we'd planned to do together, just by myself. So that's what I've been doing. This is my 4th international trip. I've been to New Zealand, Peru, Japan, and now here. "Do you ever feel lonely?" I asked. She thought about it for a moment. "Sometimes. But you know what's lonelier? Being with people who don't value you. I'd rather be alone on a Scottish hillside than sitting in a room full of people who make me feel invisible." Her words resonated deeply. I'd felt more connected to myself, more alive, in these weeks alone in Scotland than I'd felt in years surrounded by the routines and obligations of my life in Portland. From Scotland, I took a ferry to Northern Ireland, then drove down to Dublin. Ireland was different from Scotland. Greener somehow, with a different energy. The people were warmer, more openly friendly. I stayed in a pub in Galway where the owner, hearing I was traveling alone, invited me to join a traditional music session in the bar that evening. I sat in that crowded pub, surrounded by strangers singing songs in languages I didn't understand, and felt something break open inside me. I cried, right there in public, tears streaming down my face while I smiled. The woman next to me, an Irish grandmother who reminded me of Helen, put her arm around me. "Sometimes joy hurts," she said simply, "especially when you've gone without it for too long." She was right. This was joy, pure and uncomplicated, the kind I'd forgotten existed. And it hurt because I'd denied myself this for so long, because I'd spent decades believing I didn't deserve it, that my purpose was to enable someone else's happiness at the expense of my own. My 5 weeks of travel went by too quickly. Before I knew it, I was on the flight back to Portland, my carry-on bag full of souvenirs and my phone full of photos and my heart full of something I couldn't quite name, but knew was precious. As the plane descended toward Portland, I felt a moment of anxiety. What was I returning to? My modest apartment, my quiet life, the absence of the sun who'd once been my entire world. But then I thought about all the places I'd seen, all the people I'd met, all the versions of myself I'd discovered in those weeks abroad. I was returning different than I'd left. Stronger, more certain of my own worth, less willing to accept crumbs when I deserved the whole feast. Whatever came next, I'd face it as this new version of myself. And that, I realized, was enough. Chapter 6. The Letters I Never Sent. When I returned to Portland, I found 3 months' worth of mail piled up in my apartment. Bills, junk mail, catalogs, and buried in the middle, a cream-colored envelope with familiar handwriting, Damien's handwriting. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Part of me wanted to throw it away, unopened, to maintain the clean break I'd made, but curiosity won out. "Dear Mom, it's been 4 months since the wedding, 4 months since your email, 4 months of silence. Vivian says I should just accept that you've chosen to cut me out of your life and move on. Her therapist says you're exhibiting narcissistic behavior by making everything about you when it was our wedding day. But I keep thinking about some of the things you wrote, and I can't seem to let it go. You said I stopped loving you somewhere along the way. That's not true. I never stopped. I don't know. Things got complicated. Vivian's family has expectations. They have a certain way of doing things, a certain level of presentation that's expected. And I don't know how to say this without sounding terrible. You don't fit into that world. Your apartment, your job, your whole life, it's just so different from what they're used to. And it was easier to just create distance than to constantly explain or defend or deal with Vivian's comments about how embarrassing it was that my mother worked in a bookstore. I know that makes me sound awful. I know it does. But I'm trying to be honest here. The thing is, after your email, after you said all those things about sacrifice and love and what you gave up for me, I started thinking about things I'd forgotten, or maybe things I'd chosen not to remember because they made me feel guilty. I remember being 8 years old and you working night shifts at the diner. Mrs. Patterson from next door would watch me, and I'd sit at her window waiting for you to come home. You were always so tired, but you'd still help me with homework and read me stories. I remember when I was 12 and I wanted to go to computer camp, but it was expensive. You didn't go to the doctor when you were sick that spring because you were saving money for the camp. You ended up with pneumonia and in the hospital for 3 days. I never made the connection until now. I remember my college graduation. You were the only parent there alone. All the others had partners or family groups. But you stood there crying and smiling, and you told me you'd never been more proud of anything in your life. I remember all of it, and I also remember the moment I started being ashamed of you. It was at a company party 3 years ago, right when I got promoted to director. Everyone was talking about their families, their backgrounds. Someone asked about my father, and I said he'd died when I was young. They asked what you did, and I said you were retired. I didn't mention the bookstore. I made it sound like you'd had this successful career instead of working 2 and 3 jobs just to keep us afloat. Vivian asked about you once, early in our relationship. I told her you were difficult, that we'd had a falling out. It was easier than explaining the truth, that I was embarrassed by your modest life, that I'd rather pretend you barely existed than have her family meet you and judge me for coming from nothing. I'm not writing this to apologize. I don't think I'm ready for that yet. I'm writing because I need you to know that I heard you. That email, the things you said, they got through. And I've been thinking about them every day since. Vivienne is pregnant. 3 months. We're having a daughter. Her family is thrilled. They're already planning the nursery, picking out private schools, setting up trust funds. And all I can think about is that our daughter will have everything I had and more. Opportunities, resources, stability. But will she have what you gave me? That fierce, unconditional love. That willingness to sacrifice everything for your child's well-being. I don't know if I'm capable of that. I look at Vivian and I see someone focused on appearances, on maintaining status, on raising a child who reflects well on us. And I realize that's what I've become too. Someone who cares more about how things look than what they actually mean. I don't know how to fix this, Mom. I don't know if it can be fixed, but I wanted you to know that your words mattered, that they changed something in me, even if I'm not sure what to do with that change yet. I hope you're well. I hope you found some peace after everything that happened. Damien. I read the letter 3 times, sitting at my kitchen table as the afternoon light faded. Then I folded it carefully and put it in a drawer with other important documents. I didn't respond. Not because I was being petty or punishing him, but because I genuinely didn't know what to say. His letter was honest. I'd give him that. But honesty without action is just words. And I'd spent too many years accepting apologies that weren't backed up by changed behavior. He was having a daughter. I was going to be a grandmother. The knowledge brought a complicated mix of emotions. Joy for the new life. Sadness that I probably wouldn't be part of her world. Concern that she'd grow up in the same toxic environment of social climbing and superficial values that had corrupted Damien. Instead of writing back to Damien, I wrote letters to my future granddaughter. Letters she'd probably never read, but that helped me process my feelings. Dear little one, you don't exist yet, not quite. You're still forming, still becoming. But already I think about you. Already I love you. This tiny person I'll probably never meet. I want you to know some things, even if your father never tells you. Even if I remain a name you barely recognize. The grandmother who disappeared before you were born. I want you to know that love shouldn't hurt, that family isn't just about blood, it's about respect and care, and showing up for each other, that you never have to earn love from the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. I want you to know that it's okay to have dreams that don't fit into other people's plans for you, that working in a bookstore, or being a waitress, or any honest work is nothing to be ashamed of, that your value as a person has nothing to do with your job title or your social status or how much money you have. I want you to know that sometimes the people who love us most are the ones we take for granted, and sometimes, by the time we realize what we've lost, it's too late to get it back. I hope your father becomes the man I raised him to be, the kind boy who cried when we had to put our dog down, who volunteered at shelters, who promised he'd always take care of me when I was old. I hope becoming your father brings that boy back. But if it doesn't, if you grow up in a home where appearances matter more than character, where people are valued for what they can provide rather than who they are, I want you to know there's another way, that you can choose differently, that you don't have to continue the cycle. I'm writing this from my small apartment in Portland. I just got back from Scotland and Ireland, my first real adventure. At 68, I finally learned that it's never too late to choose yourself, to pursue the dreams you've deferred, to become the person you were always meant to be. I wish I could teach you these things in person. I wish I could be the grandmother who bakes cookies and tells stories and shows you that you're loved just for existing. But life doesn't always give us what we wish for. Still, you'll be in my thoughts. On your birthday, wherever I am, I'll think of you and send you love across whatever distance separates us. And maybe, someday, if your father finds his way back to the values I tried to teach him, we'll meet, and I'll tell you all of this in person. Until then, little one, I hope you're surrounded by love, real love, the kind that asks nothing in return, that sacrifices willingly, that sees you as precious beyond measure. Your grandmother who never got to be, Dorothea. Writing these letters became a ritual. Every Sunday evening, I'd sit down and write to my granddaughter, telling her about my week, sharing wisdom I'd learned, expressing love to someone who might never know I existed. It was therapeutic in a way I hadn't expected. It kept my heart open even when I was protecting myself from further hurt. It reminded me that love didn't have to be reciprocated to be real, that I could care about this child and wish her well without expecting anything in return. 3 months after Damien's letter, another envelope arrived. This one was from Vivienne. Chapter 7. The Unexpected Apology. Vivienne's letter was handwritten on expensive stationery, her penmanship perfect, probably the result of expensive private school education. Dear Dorothea, I'm writing this against my better judgment and against the advice of both my therapist and my mother, but I'm 6 months pregnant now, hormonal and emotional, and I can't stop thinking about what happened at the wedding. Damien doesn't know I'm writing this. He'd probably be angry if he knew. We've reached an uneasy truce where we just don't talk about you or what happened. It's easier for him that way. But I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it from me directly, not filtered through Damien's perception or my own justifications. You were right about me. In your email, you said I wasn't a woman of character, that true class has nothing to do with money. You were absolutely right, and I've been angry about it for 6 months because the truth hurts worse than any lie. I grew up with everything: money, education, connections, opportunities. My parents gave me every advantage, sent me to the best schools, introduced me to the right people. And somewhere along the way, I absorbed this toxic idea that I was better than other people. Not because I'd earned it, but because I'd been born into the right family. When I met Damien, I loved him. I still do, I think, though I'm not sure I actually know what love means anymore. But I also saw him as a project, someone from a lesser background, who I could shape and mold to fit into my world. It sounds horrible when I say it that bluntly, but it's the truth. I encouraged him to distance himself from you. I made comments about your job, your apartment, your appearance. Not overtly cruel comments, but the kind of subtle digs that accumulate over time. I made him feel like he had to choose between his new life with me and his old life with you. And when he chose me, I felt victorious. The wedding seating was my idea. My mother suggested we put you at a family table near the front, but I insisted on putting you in the back. I wanted you to know your place in Damien's new hierarchy. I wanted you to feel small and irrelevant because that's how I decided you were. The food situation. That was partly intentional too. I didn't specifically tell the caterers to serve you garbage, but I did tell them that table 28 was low priority, that they could serve it last and use whatever was left. I knew what that meant. I knew you'd get the worst of everything. And when Damien made that comment, when he said you were used to eating what life leaves behind, I laughed. I encouraged it. I thought it was funny. I thought you deserved to be humiliated for being poor, for being ordinary, for being a reminder of the life Damien came from. I was cruel, deliberately, consciously cruel. And I justified it by telling myself that you were trying to hold Damien back, that you were emotionally manipulative, that you were trying to guilt him into staying connected to you. But then you sent that email, and my mother read it, and she sat me down for a conversation I'll never forget. My mother comes from the same world I do. Old money, social connections, all of that. But she grew up in a different generation, and she has standards about behavior that I'd dismissed as old-fashioned. She told me that I'd behaved abhorrently, that treating someone's mother that way, regardless of her social status, was inexcusable. That true refinement means treating everyone with dignity, especially those who can't benefit you. She said I'd revealed myself to be nouveau riche in the worst way, someone so insecure in their own status that they have to demean others to feel superior. And coming from my mother, who rarely criticizes, those words cut deep. I'm 6 months pregnant now, and I think about my daughter all the time. I think about what kind of woman I want her to become. Do I want her to be like me? Someone who values appearances over character. Someone who treats people as disposable based on their economic status. The answer is no. I don't want that for her. Which means I have to change. I have to become better than I am. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to want a relationship with me or with your granddaughter. But I needed you to know that I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry for how I treated you. You didn't deserve it. No one deserves it. I'm trying to be better. I started volunteering at a women's shelter, working with single mothers who are trying to make ends meet while raising their children alone. It's humbling and necessary. I'm learning things my expensive education never taught me. I'm also encouraging Damien to reach out to you, though he's resistant. He's carrying a lot of guilt, and it's easier for him to maintain distance than to face what he's done. But our daughter deserves to know her grandmother, if you're willing. She deserves to understand that family isn't about money or status. It's about love and sacrifice and showing up even when it's hard. I don't know if I'll ever be the kind of person you'd want to know, but I'm trying to be better than the person I was at that wedding. And part of that journey is acknowledging the harm I've caused and taking responsibility for it. I'm sorry, Dorothea. For everything. Vivian. I sat with that letter for days, reading it multiple times, trying to understand how I felt about it. On one hand, it felt genuine. Vivian's apology seemed to come from real reflection and growth, not just because she wanted something from me. On the other hand, an apology doesn't erase harm. It doesn't undo the humiliation I felt at that wedding, or the years of subtle undermining that had poisoned my relationship with my son. I talked about it with Helen over tea one afternoon. She'd become my closest confidant through all of this, the person I turned to when I needed wisdom. The question isn't whether you accept her apology, Helen said thoughtfully. The question is whether you want to open yourself up to potential hurt again, because that's what forgiveness means in a practical sense. It means making yourself vulnerable to people who've already proven they can hurt you. I keep thinking about my granddaughter, I admitted. About this little girl who didn't ask to be born into this complicated situation. She deserves to have a grandmother, doesn't she? Maybe, but you also deserve to protect yourself. You've spent your whole life putting other people's needs first. It's okay to put yourself first this time. But what if I regret it? What if years from now, I look back and realize I missed the chance to know my granddaughter because I was too proud or too hurt to forgive? Helen reached across the table and took my hand. Dorothea, you can forgive without reconciling. You can wish them well without opening yourself up to more mistreatment. You don't owe anyone access to your life, not even your son, not even your granddaughter. Whatever you decide, make sure it's because it's what you want, not because you feel obligated. Her words resonated. I'd spent so much of my life operating from obligation, from the belief that mothers were supposed to sacrifice endlessly and forgive infinitely, but I was learning that self-preservation wasn't selfishness, that boundaries weren't punishment, that I could love someone and still choose to protect myself from them. I decided to write back to Vivian, not to reconcile, but to acknowledge her apology and set clear terms for any future relationship. Dear Vivian, thank you for your letter. I appreciate your honesty and your willingness to take responsibility for your actions. Growth is difficult, and the fact that you're attempting it says something about your character. I accept your apology, not because what you did was acceptable or easily forgotten, but because I believe in second chances, and because holding on to anger only hurts me, not you. However, acceptance of an apology doesn't automatically translate to restored relationship. Trust, once broken, takes years to rebuild, and I'm not sure I have enough years left to invest in rebuilding something that was destroyed so thoroughly. Regarding your daughter, my granddaughter, I think about her often. I've even written letters to her that she'll probably never read, but I want you to know that I wish her well. I hope she grows up loved and valued. I hope you raise her to be kinder than you were at that wedding, to have more empathy than Damien showed that night. If, at some point in the future, when she's old enough to understand, you want to tell her about me, I'm open to that. But any relationship we have must be on my terms. I won't be relegated to the background again. I won't accept scraps of attention when it's convenient. Either I'm family and treated with the respect family deserves, or I'm not family at all. Those are my boundaries. They're non-negotiable. I hope your pregnancy goes well. I hope becoming a mother teaches you the same lessons it taught me about what really matters in life. And I hope that if we ever do meet again, it will be as equals, with mutual respect, not as an inconvenient relative you're tolerating out of obligation. I wish you well. Dorothea. After I sent the letter, I felt a strange sense of peace. I'd stood my ground. I'd maintained my boundaries. I'd opened a door to possible future reconciliation without compromising my dignity or my needs. Whether they walked through that door was up to them. Nut. Chapter 8. The Birth and the Choice. 7 months after the wedding, I received a text message from an unknown number. It contained a single photo and a caption. The photo showed a tiny newborn baby, red-faced and wrapped in a pink blanket. The caption read, Delaney Margaret Marlowe, born March 3rd, 7 pounds, 4 ounces. She has your eyes. I stared at that photo for an hour, my heart breaking and mending at the same time. My granddaughter, this tiny person who shared my DNA, who might have inherited pieces of me in ways that went beyond just eye color. She was beautiful, perfect, and I loved her immediately with a fierceness that surprised me. The text had come from Vivian's phone number. A follow-up message arrived an hour later. I know you set boundaries. I'm respecting them. But I wanted you to know she's here, and she's healthy, and her middle name is after you. That was Damien's idea. Margaret, my middle name, the name of my own grandmother, a woman I'd adored as a child. I didn't respond right away. I needed time to process what this meant, what it might lead to. 2 weeks later, another text. We'd like to visit. Not asking you to come here. That seems like too much too soon. But we're in Portland this weekend for a work thing of Damien's. Could we stop by? Just for an hour. We want you to meet Delaney. I called Helen immediately. What do I do? What do you want to do? She asked. I want to meet her. I want to hold my granddaughter and look at her face and tell her I love her. But I'm scared. Scared of getting hurt again. Scared of falling back into old patterns where I accept whatever treatment they're willing to give me. Then set the terms, Helen said firmly. They come to your apartment, your territory. You control the length of the visit, and you make it clear that this doesn't mean everything is forgiven or forgotten. It means you're willing to take one small step toward seeing if reconciliation is possible. I responded to Vivian's text. You can visit Saturday at 2 p.m., 1 hour. My apartment. Come prepared to have an honest conversation about what kind of relationship, if any, we can have moving forward. Saturday arrived cold and rainy, typical Portland spring weather. I cleaned my apartment obsessively, then stopped myself. Why was I trying to impress them? This was my home. It was modest but clean and comfortable. If they had a problem with it, that was their issue, not mine. At exactly 2 p.m., my doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Damien and Vivian standing in the hallway. Vivian held a car seat carrier with a tiny bundle inside. Both of them looked nervous. Mom, Damien said. Thank you for seeing us. I stepped aside to let them in. They entered awkwardly, looking around at my small living room. I saw Vivian's eyes take in the worn furniture, the secondhand bookshelf full of paperbacks, the simple decorations, but I didn't see judgment in her expression. If anything, She looked uncomfortable, as if she was remembering the person she used to be. "Please, sit," I said. Vivian carefully lifted the baby out of the carrier. Delaney was awake, her blue eyes, my blue eyes, looking around with that unfocused newborn gaze. Vivian held her for a moment, then looked at me. "Would you like to hold her?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. Vivian placed my granddaughter in my arms, and I felt something inside me break open. She was so small, so perfect, so completely innocent of all the complicated history that surrounded her birth. "Hello, sweet girl," I whispered. "I'm your Nana. I've been waiting to meet you." Delaney made a small sound, not quite a cry, just a newborn noise. Her tiny hand wrapped around my finger with surprising strength. I looked up to find both Damien and Vivian watching me with tears in their eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom," Damien said. His voice cracked. "I'm so sorry for everything. For the wedding. For the years before that. For all the ways I made you feel like you didn't matter. You were right about everything you said in that email. I became someone I shouldn't have become. Someone you didn't raise me to be." "Why?" I asked, still holding Delaney. "Why did you let it happen? Why did you treat me that way?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Shame, mostly. I was ashamed of where I came from. Ashamed that my mother worked in a bookstore instead of having some impressive career. Ashamed that I couldn't give you the kind of life you'd given me. And instead of dealing with that shame, instead of recognizing that you were the one who'd sacrificed to give me opportunities, I pushed you away. It was easier than facing what I owed you. You don't owe me anything," I said quietly. "Parents don't sacrifice expecting repayment. But I did deserve respect. I deserved to be treated like a human being with feelings and dignity." "You did," Vivian said, "and we failed you completely. Dorothea, I know I wrote you a letter, but I need to say this in person. I'm sorry, not just for the wedding, but for the person I was, for the values I held, for making Damien feel like he had to choose between his past and his future. Are you different now?" I asked. "Oh, or are you just saying what you think I want to hear?" "I'm trying to be different," she said honestly. "I still catch myself thinking in the old ways sometimes, judging people based on superficial things. But I'm working on it. The volunteering helps. Having Delaney helps. She makes me think about what kind of role model I want to be." I looked down at my granddaughter, this tiny person who'd somehow become the catalyst for all of this. "What happens now?" I asked. "You've apologized. I appreciate that. But an apology doesn't automatically rebuild a relationship. Trust takes time. We understand that," Damien said. "We're not asking for everything to be okay immediately. We're just asking for a chance to prove we've changed, a chance to build something new, something better than what we had before. On your terms," Vivian added quickly. "Whatever you're comfortable with. If you want us to visit once a month, we'll drive up from Seattle every month. If you want phone calls first, building up slowly, we'll do that. If you want to set specific boundaries about behavior and expectations, we'll respect them. This has to work for you, not just for us." I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The wedding, the email, the months of silence, my trip to Scotland, the letters I'd written to a granddaughter I thought I'd never meet. All of it had been necessary to reach this point, where I could engage from a position of strength rather than desperate need for their approval. "Okay," I said finally. "Here's what I propose. We start slow. You visit once a month for now. Here, in Portland, at my apartment. We spend a few hours together. You let me be part of Delaney's life without conditions or qualifications. I'm not a back-burner relative you trot out when convenient. I'm her grandmother, and I get treated as such." "Yes," Damien said immediately. "Absolutely. And if at any point I feel like we're sliding back into old patterns, if I feel disrespected or undervalued, I walk away, permanently this time. I love Delaney already, but I love myself more. And I won't sacrifice my dignity again. Not for anyone." "That's fair," Vivian said. "That's more than fair. We'll earn your trust back, Dorothea, however long it takes." We spent the next hour talking, not about the past, but about the future, about Delaney, about what kind of grandparent I wanted to be, about logistics and expectations. It was awkward at times, uncomfortable, but there was also something hopeful in it. When they left, Damien hugged me at the door. "I love you, Mom," he said. "I know I didn't show it. I know I hurt you terribly, but I never stopped loving you, even when I was treating you like I didn't. I know, I said, and I never stopped loving you either. But love isn't enough if it's not accompanied by respect and decent behavior. Remember that. After they left, I sat in my living room for a long time, looking at the photo Vivienne had sent me before they came. Delaney's tiny face, her blue eyes, the promise of who she might become. I'd set boundaries. I'd protected myself, but I'd also opened a door to the possibility of healing. Not the kind of healing that erases the past or pretends it didn't happen, but the kind that acknowledges the pain and chooses to move forward anyway. Whether they'd walk through that door honorably remained to be seen, but I'd done my part. I'd stood my ground while leaving room for growth, and that was all I could do. Chapter 9. The Slow Rebuild. The first year of Delaney's life was a careful dance of rebuilding trust. True to their word, Damien and Vivian drove up from Seattle once a month, sometimes more often, but never less. They came to my apartment, spent several hours, let me hold and care for my granddaughter without hovering or judgment. I watched them carefully during those visits, looking for signs of backsliding into old patterns, but they seemed genuinely committed to change. Vivienne talked about her volunteer work with increasing passion. Damien mentioned turning down a promotion that would have required even longer hours, choosing instead to be present for his daughter's early years. Small things told me they were trying. Vivian asking genuinely interested questions about my life, not just making polite conversation. Damien bringing his laptop once and showing me photos from his childhood, memories I'd forgotten about, times we'd been happy together. Both of them respecting when I said I was tired and needed them to leave, not pushing for more time than I'd agreed to. For Delaney's first birthday, they invited me to Seattle for a small family celebration. I almost declined, the memory of the wedding still fresh enough to make me anxious about being in their territory, subject to their control. But Helen encouraged me to go. "You can't build a new relationship if you never take risks," she said. "And if they treat you poorly, you leave. You've proven you can do that." The party was nothing like the wedding, just family, about 20 people, held in Damien and Vivienne's backyard. They introduced me to everyone as Nana, made sure I was included in conversations, seated me at the main table with the immediate family. Vivienne's parents were there. I'd been dreading meeting them, imagining they'd be as terrible as I'd built them up in my mind. But Vivienne's mother, Patricia, surprised me. She pulled me aside at one point during the party. "Dorothea," she said, "I owe you an apology. I encouraged some of Vivian's worst behavior. I made comments about you being inappropriate for family events because of your economic status. I'm ashamed of that now." "What changed?" I asked. "My own mother died 6 months ago," Patricia said quietly, "and I realized that at the end, none of the things I'd valued mattered. Not the money, not the social connections, not the perfect image we presented to the world. What mattered was that my mother knew she was loved, that she felt valued and included in our lives, and I'd spent so much time focused on superficial things that I nearly forgot what actually mattered. I'm sorry for your loss," I said. "Thank you. But I mention it because I don't want Vivian to have the same regrets I have. I don't want her to realize too late that she'd pushed away someone important." "You're important, Dorothea. Not because of what you can provide or how you make the family look, but because you're Delaney's grandmother and because you clearly love that little girl very much." It was the most genuine conversation I'd had with anyone from Vivian's family. It didn't erase the past, but it opened a door to a different kind of future. As Delaney grew, I became more integrated into her life. I babysat sometimes when Damien and Vivian needed a date night. I attended her doctor appointments when Vivian had a work conflict. I was there for her first steps, her first words, all the tiny milestones that make up early childhood. But I also maintained my own life. I'd started traveling regularly, taking trips every few months to places I'd always wanted to see. Italy, Greece, Peru, Japan. I joined a book club and a hiking group. I started taking photography classes at the community college. I built a life that was full and meaningful on its own terms, not just as an appendage to my son's family. This independence, I think, was crucial to the relationship working. I wasn't desperately clinging to them, grateful for whatever scraps they'd throw me. I was choosing to be involved because I wanted to be, because they'd proven themselves worthy of that choice. 2 years after Delaney's birth, Damien and Vivian announced they were having another baby, a boy this time, who they planned to name Thomas Richard Marlowe. Richard after my late husband, Damien's father. We wanted to honor both sides of the family, Damien explained when he told me. Delaney has Vivian's father's last name as her middle name. We want Thomas to have connections to my side too. I cried when he told me. Not sad tears, but complicated ones that carried relief and grief and hope all mixed together. They were trying, really trying, and slowly, painfully, we were rebuilding something that resembled a family, but it wasn't the same as before. It couldn't be. The innocence was gone, replaced by something more realistic and, in some ways, stronger. We all knew now that relationships could break. We all understood that love required more than just feeling. It required action and respect and conscious choice. Our Curse Chapter 10. The question that changed everything. 4 years after the wedding, Delaney was old enough to ask questions. She was a bright, curious child, much like Eleanor from my earlier story, but with a happier beginning. One afternoon when I was babysitting her, she looked up at me with those blue eyes and asked, "Nana, why don't you live with us?" It was an innocent question, the kind 4-year-olds ask without understanding the weight behind them, but it opened a conversation I'd been dreading. "Well, sweetheart, I have my own home in Portland. I like living there. But Grammy and Grandpa live with us," she said, referring to Vivian's parents, who'd moved into a guest house on Damien and Vivian's property the previous year. "Don't you want to live with us too?" How do you explain to a 4-year-old that you chose independence because you'd learned the hard way that family can hurt you? That you maintained a separate life because it was the only way to protect yourself while still loving them? "I like visiting you," I said carefully, "and I like having my own space too. Sometimes grown-ups need both things, to be close to people they love, but also to have their own lives." She seemed satisfied with that answer, but it got me thinking. Damien and Vivian had been pressuring me gently to move to Seattle, to be closer, to be more available for the grandchildren. And part of me wanted that. Part of me longed for the day-to-day involvement with my grandchildren's lives, the spontaneous visits, the routine presence. But another part of me remembered sitting at that back table, eating cold leftovers, hearing my son laugh at my expense. That part of me couldn't quite trust enough to make myself that vulnerable again. I talked about it with Helen, as I talked about everything important these days. "Do you want to move?" she asked. "I don't know. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I think how nice it would be to see Delaney and Thomas every week instead of once or twice a month. But then I remember how hard I worked to build an independent life. I'm scared of giving that up." "You don't have to give it up," Helen said. "You could move to Seattle and still maintain your independence. Get your own apartment there. Continue your travels and your hobbies. Being geographically closer doesn't mean sacrificing your autonomy. What if things go bad again? What if I move there and then the relationship falls apart and I'm stuck? Then you move back. Dorothea, you're 72 years old. How much longer are you going to let fear from the past control your present? You've proven you can protect yourself. You've proven you can set boundaries. Trust yourself to do that wherever you live." She was right, of course. I'd been holding on to the trauma of that wedding day so tightly that I was letting it limit my possibilities. Yes, Damien had hurt me terribly. Yes, Vivian had been cruel. But they'd also spent 4 years proving they could change, could be better, could respect the boundaries I'd set. At some point, I had to decide if I was going to let the past define the future, or if I was willing to risk hoping for something better. I started researching apartments in Seattle. Nothing fancy, just a 1-bedroom in a nice neighborhood, close enough to Damien and Vivian's house to visit easily, but far enough to maintain psychological independence. I found one with a view of Puget Sound, within my budget, available in 3 months. Before I signed the lease, I sat down with Damien and Vivian for a serious conversation. "I'm thinking about moving to Seattle," I said, "and to be closer to you and the grandchildren. But before I do, I need to be absolutely clear about expectations and boundaries." "Of course," Vivian said. "Whatever you need. I'll have my own apartment. I'm not moving in with you or becoming a live-in babysitter. I'll visit regularly, but it will be scheduled and mutually agreed upon. I'll be available to help with childcare when I'm able, but I'm not on call 24/7. I have my own life, my own friends, my own activities, and those stay important." "That's completely reasonable," Damien said. "And if at any point I feel taken for granted, If I feel like we're slipping back into old patterns where my needs don't matter, I'll speak up. And if speaking up doesn't work, I'll move back to Portland. I need to know you hear that and accept it. We do, Vivian said firmly. Dorothea, you've taught us something important over the last few years. You've taught us that relationships have to be mutual, that they require respect and care from both sides. We're not going to take you for granted. We know how lucky we are that you gave us another chance. I moved to Seattle that fall. It was terrifying and exciting all at once. Starting over in a new city at 72, rebuilding a life while trying to integrate into my son's family without losing myself in the process. The first few months were an adjustment, learning a new neighborhood, making new friends, figuring out the rhythm of being a more present grandmother while still maintaining boundaries. There were moments when I worried I'd made a mistake, when I felt overwhelmed or concerned that I'd given up too much independence. But there were also moments of unexpected joy. Delaney running into my apartment shouting, "Nana!" when she came to visit. Thomas taking his first steps while I was watching him. Spontaneous dinners with Damien and Vivian where we laughed and told stories and felt like a real family. It wasn't perfect. We still had disagreements. There were still moments when Vivian's old judgmental tendencies surfaced, or when Damien became too focused on work and forgot to call. But we'd learned how to address these issues directly, to communicate instead of letting resentments build. Chapter 11. The conversation that mattered most. 6 years after the wedding, Delaney was old enough for harder conversations. She was 6 now, bright and perceptive, the kind of child who noticed when adults were being careful about what they said around her. One afternoon, while I was reading to her in my apartment, she asked out of nowhere, "Nana, why were you sad before?" "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Mommy said that before I was born, you and Daddy weren't talking. She said you were sad and far away." "Why?" I looked into those blue eyes, so much like mine, and made a decision. She deserved honesty, age-appropriate, but real. "Your daddy hurt my feelings very badly," I said carefully. "He said and did things that made me feel like I didn't matter to him anymore, so I went away for a while to take care of myself and figure out what I needed." "Did he say sorry?" "Eventually, yes. And he showed me he was sorry by changing his behavior, by treating me better. That's when I came back." She thought about this for a moment. "If someone hurts your feelings, do you have to forgive them?" "No," I said firmly. "You don't have to forgive anyone who hurts you. Forgiveness is something you give if and when you're ready, not something anyone can demand from you. And sometimes, the healthiest thing is to walk away from people who hurt you, even if you love them. But you forgave Daddy." "I did, eventually, because he proved he was sorry, and because he changed. But Delaney, here's something important I want you to understand. I forgave him, but I also protected myself. I made sure I had my own life, my own home, my own friends. I didn't go back to the way things were before. I built something new, something healthier." "Because you loved yourself?" she asked. I pulled her close, feeling tears sting my eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, because I finally learned to love myself as much as I love other people. And that's something I hope you always remember. You matter. Your feelings matter. And you should never let anyone, even people you love, treat you like you don't." That conversation led to others. As Delaney got older, I shared more of my story with her. Not in a way that vilified her parents, but in a way that taught her important lessons about boundaries and self-respect, and the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. I told her about the wedding, in age-appropriate terms, about feeling left out and disrespected, about making the hard choice to walk away even though it hurt, about her parents' journey toward becoming better people. "You taught them how to be better," Delaney said when she was 8, after I'd shared more details. "No," I corrected gently. "I taught them that actions have consequences. They chose to become better. That choice was theirs, not mine. I just held them accountable." These conversations shaped Delaney in ways I could see even as a child. She was more thoughtful than many kids her age, more aware of how her words and actions affected others. She stood up for kids who were being bullied at school. She asked questions about fairness and justice and how to make things right when you've made mistakes. She was becoming the kind of person I'd hoped my son would be. And maybe, in some way, she was getting there because of the difficult lessons our family had learned.